Our next speaker is Brendan Lowney, co-founder and macroeconomist for Forest Economic Advisors. Brendan interprets forecasts, the North American International Economic Landscape Analysis that form the basis of FEA's industry projections. He's going to be speaking on issues that are at the heart of this conference and indeed at the heart of the global off-site construction movement, namely affordability, productivity, and labor shortages. Please join me in giving Brendan a warm welcome.
Thanks, Art. Welcome, everybody. As Art said, I'm kind of the replacement for the replacement, but we think we have a lot to say about this issue. And really what my talk is about is really kind of getting to the genesis of why we decided to have this conference. So a little background, we started our company back in '09. It was a depression in our industry. And somehow I convinced 5 guys who in some ways are very bright, in other ways not so much, to quit their jobs and join me on a venture and a startup. So we climbed up the hill, very nerve-wracking in the beginning. Climbed up the hill, now we're a good, stable, small company. And Paul and I decided, well, we haven't had a cardiac event in a while. Why don't we have a giant conference and rent out the World Trade Center? So here we are. But what caused us to do that, other than our need for adrenaline, is just this confluence of trends that we kept seeing over and over in the US and around the world relating to lack of labor shortages, and weak productivity in construction, and the need for something to change. We look at these trends constantly, and we realize it's not getting better. Things aren't getting better in that regard. They're getting worse, so something needs to change. And that's where we came up with this notion of talking about a revolution in construction and a way to deal with labor productivity. So I'm going to start with mostly what I'm going to talk about is kind of a statement of the problem. And so, let's start with the population's growing. So the US population grows by about 2.3 million a year. It used to be about 3 million a year, but 2.3 million a year. And we need to house these folks, right? And then we look at this chart, which is my favorite chart in the world. It's the US population by age. And you can see the 2 biggest age groups, 27 and 28-year-olds, just coming into that period of time where they start to break out of their mom and dad's homes, form new households. In a couple of years, the main trigger events will be birth of first child, marriage, and you start to get single-family home demand. So this chart tells us, okay, we have a need to build houses. We haven't been building much, and there's a whole big pig moving through the python here. So this problem is going to get worse, not better, or more acute, not easier. On top of that, US houses are old. This is like a mother joke in there. How old are they? US houses are old. The median owner-occupied house, is 39 years old. It was in 2015. This data comes out about every 3 years or so. It's definitely over 40 at this point. So median house is over 40. Only 3% of homes were built that were standing in 2015 were built in the previous 5 years. And for some perspective on just how little we've been building, if we look at the housing stock, take a snapshot in 2015, we know that more than twice as many homes were built and are still standing between 1980 and 85 than were built between 2010 and 2015. So 9.8 million homes are standing that were built in the early 80s. 4.4 million homes are built and are still standing in 2015. That's just amazing to me, because we keep hearing, wow, the housing recovery is doing pretty well, right? So really it isn't. We've had 7 years of sequential increases in housing completions in the US, okay? But if we look at where we were in 2017, we're basically at recession levels 7 years into a a recovery. Okay? And now if we look at this from a longer time frame, we'll look at housing starts and we'll compare it to the population. You can see that the so-called housing recovery is it's pretty lame, right? So let's just look at the orange bars, and you can see we're building about a little over 1.2 million homes in the U.S. That brown bar is an estimate for 18. Currently, we've had a little bit of a step back. So we're really only building about 1.2 to 1.25 million homes a year. So for some perspective, between 1959 and 2000, we averaged 1.53 million homes a year, okay? So with a much lower population. If we look at the black line and we just kind of normalize housing starts per 1,000 people, you can see we're at 4. I mean, well below where we were at any time other than the Great Depression and World War II, those two big dips there. So some of you folks have seen me speak before. Most of you probably haven't. You know, every year I'm here to tell you that the housing recovery is just around the corner. And that kind of reminds me of a text message I saw. It originally said brilliant Irish text message, but I thought the brilliant part was redundant, so I just shortened it. So it's like, Mary, I'm here to have one more pint with I'm just going to have one more pint with the lads. If I'm not home in 20 minutes, read this again. And I feel like that's a lot of what happens when I come up here and give my housing forecast. I know what the trends are. I know we have old houses. I know we need to replace them. I know we have a lot of people. I know we have a strong economy, and yet we can't punch through. We just haven't been able to punch through. So here's housing starts relative to underlying demand. So that green line there is, that's just one simple straight line that Paul and I build with about 19 spreadsheets, and we look at population dynamics by age cohort. We look at the propensity to form a house. We make a bunch of other assumptions about second home demand, vacation home demand, replacement demand. And we get a pretty good idea of what underlying demand for housing is. And if we go back in time from 70 to 95, the area over the curve and the area under the curve are roughly equal. And you know, we come into 95 and we're roughly balanced, okay? So then we get a big housing bubble or a housing bubble coming up into 2005, and we're overbuilt on a cumulative basis by about 2 million starts as we start to hit the skids, okay? But what's remarkable to me is that area under the curve. That's the pent-up demand, okay, that we like to talk about. And right now, by this metric, we're about 3.5 to 4 million homes underbuilt relative to underlying demand. And that ignores this swath of millennials who are in their late 20s coming through the pipeline. So we're not building enough houses, and a lot of the reasons relate to supply side issues. Inability to build affordable homes, a number of issues relating to permitting, and of course, labor, okay? And the problem's worse in some places than in others. California is a nightmare. Look at it. So if we look at a metric showing housing permits per 1,000 employed people, you can see, the U.S., it's bad. You get this red line. We're well below where we were. California has been flatlining forever. There was a survey in the Bay Area News where they asked folks, what's the main cause of the housing shortage there? And number one was greedy developers. I don't know about that. Number two was too many jobs being created. I mean, that's ridiculous. We're creating jobs. That's what you want to do, and we can't house people affordably for a whole variety of reasons. But part of it is just the cost of building a home. So I go to a report from the Government Accountability Office last month, and they said, okay, what's the cost to develop a housing unit in areas, a housing unit that receives a government subsidy? What was the cost to build that? Now, keep in mind, most of this is they're primarily rentals, they're primarily multifamily units. And the cost in California was $326,000. That's just the construction cost. just the cost to get it up and going. The median income in the U.S. for households a little over $60,000. So for a unit that receives government support in a multifamily building primarily to cost $326,000, there's a problem with affordability in the U.S. Picture's worth 1,000 words, I guess. And this house is worth $1 million almost, apparently. So this house was sold in early May for $938,000. Okay. You can tell it's not. People say, "Oh, it's all the land." Well, yeah, okay. There's not much land, and that's a teardown, and it's a symptom of a wider problem, particularly in California and the Northeast. And that's where we hear about a lot of issues. Fortunately, only 18% of homes in the U.S. since 2010 have been built in California and the Northeast. 50% of homes, or slightly more, are built in the U.S. South. The South is where the action is, and they tend to have a higher single-family home share, but increasingly we're seeing multifamily construction. And the multifamily construction is where a lot of the volumetric housing and off-site housing can really hit a sweet spot. But as Ted Benson's going to talk about, the single-family home sector is definitely in play for this revolution in construction. So, and affordability is not just, it's not just particular to the U.S. As a matter of fact, among English-speaking countries, plus Canada, the U.S. actually has the most affordable homes. So we look at real house prices, okay, and we can see U.S. real house prices are down almost 7% relative to their peak prior to the housing bust. But you look at Canada, they're up 44% since the housing bust. If you look at New Zealand, they're up 450% since relative to where they were in 1980. The affordability crisis in New Zealand and Australia is off the charts. And frankly, that's where we've started to generate a lot of our interest in this topic, is trying to help folks in New Zealand wrestle with a couple different issues. One, how do we process wood and make money on it rather than sending logs to China? And two is, what do we do about our affordability crisis in housing? It's kind of when the chocolate and the peanut butter mix. It's like there's a solution in there somewhere. So affordability is an issue, and I'm going to just quantify the labor issue. So if we look at this red line here, it's employment and residential construction. We're at the peak. We're at about 1 million. This is 2005, 2006-ish. Okay, and you can see now we've had this steady recovery in housing, and we're about 20% lower. Okay, but the unemployment rate in this sector is lower than it was back during the height of the bubble. So we just simply don't have a big pool of folks sitting on the sidelines waiting to draw in. Okay, so we need to figure out how to build more with fewer workers. So I look at the General Contractors Association data, and you look at their annual survey, and you can see how hard it is. 58% reported trouble hiring carpenters, 51% with concrete workers, and right on down the list, okay? And then I looked at the 18 survey, and it just got worse. And when we look at the 19 survey, it's likely to get worse. So this is a solution. This is a problem that likely isn't going away, okay? We have a 3.7% unemployment rate, yet we're having trouble building houses. The economy's strong, yet we're not building enough houses. Well, it's pulling in people off the sidelines, but in the construction sector, it's been tough sledding, and we don't see that changing. So what are some of the reasons? Well, the prolonged recession just forced a lot of folks out of the industry, and then they never came back. We know that a lot of young people are not coming into the sector to replace those that are retiring. I mean, you go try to get an R&R contractor now, and they're all in their 50s and 60s. And you don't have that replacement in the 20s and early 30s. And there's cultural shift. A lot of folks, they want to work in an office environment. They want to work in tech. It's not a sexy way to make a living. And then there's the immigration downturn, right? So in a lot of the South, where again 50% of the homes are built, some of these trades are really dominated by recent immigrants from Mexico, documented or undocumented, either one. Drywalling, framing, okay? And in 2015, there were 570,000 fewer Mexican-born construction workers. And that really doesn't have anything to do with you-know-who, right? So this is prior to 2015. In the 5 years ending in 2015, the U.S. had net migration from the U.S. to Mexico rather than the other way around. Opioids are a huge and distressing issue as well, and I'll talk about that. Little numbers behind what's going on with immigration from Mexico. This is assuming we had very lax immigration policy, which everyone knows we don't. We look at the change in population of 15 to 34-year-olds, the type of folks who would come over and maybe work construction or work on a construction site, and you can see we're much lower growth rate in those figures. Probably a better chart to look at is the fertility rate. I mean, quite literally, they ain't making Mexicans like they used to. They're just not. So we're not going to have a source. And a lot of the immigration that we are getting is coming, is higher educated, coming from Asia. So that's unlikely to change. And then as far as bringing people in, this is kind of a depressing slide here. Alan Kruger from Princeton University really wanted to look at why is there such a decline of young men in the labor force. Young men's labor force participation is much weaker. And he looks at the period between 1999 and 2000. And what he did is he looked at a metric that kind of combined the effect of opioid prescription rates and declines in the labor force productivity rate. And we show this to our resource clients because it's almost like a tree map of the US, okay? So the dark green areas are areas where you have both high opioid prescription rate and a large change, negative change in the labor force participation rate, okay? But you can see the South is a big area, and that's, again, where many, many homes are built. Video games are another kind of counterintuitive reason why we're seeing much lower labor force participation. This study estimated that between 20 and 40% of the decline in labor force participation rates for men between 21 and 30 was due to video games. It's just remarkable to me. So now we're going to get, so we don't have a lot of labor, we have a need to build houses, and we're not doing it efficiently. So Andrew showed you a slide from the UK from McKinsey, and he talked about something called the World Cup. I'm not sure what that is. So I'm a Boston fan. You thought I'd probably come up here and talk about the Red Sox, but no. We're usually more happy when our rivals are miserable, so I'm going to talk about how this slide starts after the last time the Montreal Canadiens won the Stanley Cup. And you can see that we have a 20% decline in the U.S. productivity in the construction sector since 1995, okay, relative to a 40% increase in productivity in manufacturing, okay? And this slide I pilfered from the presentation that you were supposed to see. So you can see just, if we look at from 1947 to 2010, a longer time frame, agriculture's up by 1,500%. Why? Well, a lot of it has to do with bioengineering to increase yields, land assembly and automation for scale, a lot of exciting things in agriculture. Manufacturing is up 760%. You have entirely new concepts of flow. You've got aggressive move to automate robots, that sort of thing. Retail's up. You have just-in-time management. You have increased scale. You also have globalization, allowing for cheaper goods. You have much more efficient retail sector. And in construction, I think they introduced the nail gun. Anything else? Not much else. Okay. And this electric screwdriver, cordless, so you can trip over the cord, I guess. This is great. This is a great piece of research that the McKinsey folks did do. So they look at level of productivity, productivity growth. Where you want to be is in the Northeast. Kind of our thinking for this conference as well. Where you don't want to be is the Southwest. So if we look at just kind of the low productivity growth areas, level areas, framing, nightmare. Single family housing, not much better. Multifamily housing, getting a little better. Auto manufacturing. So, and as Andrew pointed out much more eloquently than I would, why is that? We're not building cars in our driveways, okay? The idea that every home is a snowflake and a unique thing is something that needs to change. Something else that needs to change is this guy. Can't figure out if he wants to be seen or not, but I just so. And now I'm going to steal something from Jerry McCaughey, who's going to be talking to you tomorrow. And he's going to tell you. He's going to tell you a lot of things. And if you're a wood producer, you might. I hope you're not too sensitive. But he's going to tell you that if you have a process that is labor constrained and you can't change the labor, and we just talked about why you probably can't change the labor, then you have to change the process. And this is where we start talking about the benefits of the offsite construction, BIM, business information modeling. So it allows you to build the house or the home or the building before you build the building. A lot of these buildings, as Andrew would say, they're built multiple times in a digital environment. Speed. So you can build the foundation and build your elements simultaneously. The folks from Marriott will tell you that in certain cases, their time to occupancy has been cut by 50%. So if you're a developer, that should get your ears ringing. You free up your money much faster. There's less need for labor, less training. We have a gentleman from Legal and General who used to be there, who we worked with, who talks about the de-skilling of the process. So you can get people up and going a lot more quickly. And you can essentially double your potential workforce because you're in the factory environment. It has opened up a lot more opportunity for women who have traditionally been a little bit more reluctant to work on, for good reason, on-site construction jobs. So weather's always nice. It's always nice in California and in a factory, right? Greater efficiency, quality, productivity. I was just talking to Ted before this about how wonderful. We toured his facility and just the quality when you can see and touch the quality of the buildings, the houses that he's making, and you kind of compare that to how most people react when they hear about, prefab, a modular home. It's 180 degrees different. The reality is 180 degrees different. There's greater procurement efficiency. So this is why we at FEA, we're telling our resource clients, our manufacturing clients, you need to come to this conference and hear about how the supply chain is going to evolve. Things aren't going to stay the same. You'll see more buying direct from the manufacturer, buying in bulk, buying different products. It's a great need for that. And then, of course, safety is a big issue. So I've talked about kind of why we've had the conference, why we you know, the need for to do more, less, be more productive. That's the off-site. And then wood. Why wood? Well, the cynical answer is, well, that's how we make our living. It's the truth. We've been in the wood business for 20 some odd years, Paul and I, Rocky, Greg. But the truth is also that wood's a sustainable option. It's a zero waste industry. These next few slides I completely pilfered from Think Wood. It's renewable. You know, concrete's not renewable, steel's not renewable. And there's generally more trees out there than folks think. People say, well, if we start building with wood, are we going to have enough trees? Yes. The current volume of standing tree growth is almost 40% higher than the annual harvest in North America. Water pollution, so relative to wood, steel pollutes 300 times more, concrete 470 times more. Fossil fuel consumption is a lot lower in the whole process of getting wood to the site. You know, steel's 140% more, concrete's 190% more. Smog, a lot less smog potential associated with constructing with wood. Concrete, not to bash them, but they like to bash wood. I mean, we'd say that's the second biggest CO2 producing sector in the world. So, and just looking at, just throwing some numbers, I looked at this T3 building. It's a 7-story, 240,000 square foot building in Minneapolis. You know, just getting into a couple points. It took the equivalent of almost 1,000 cars off the road because it was made out of wood. And also, it took 15 minutes to grow in North American forests to grow the wood used for that. So there's a lot of wood out there. Which means I put this on. If you want a copy of the presentation, just reach out to us. We're not going to do questions now, but I'm going to pass the baton on to Ted, and I want to thank you all again for coming.